The first thing Ashley said that night was, "You should be grateful we're helping you think ahead." She said it in my dining room, holding a wine glass like she already belonged there. Michael stood beside her, silent, staring at the old oak table his mother and I had used for 30 years. I heard the clock in the hall more clearly than I heard their footsteps. Then Ashley looked at the walls, the cabinets, the doorway to my workshop and asked, "So, William, have you decided what happens to all this when you're gone?" I did not answer right away. I looked at my son. He lowered his eyes. That was when I knew this question had been rehearsed before they arrived. "Tell me honestly, would that have sounded normal to you?" My name is William Carter. I was 67 when I understood what had been building around me. I live in Cleveland, Ohio. I restore violins for a living. Old instruments, old wood. Fine cracks, quiet damage. My wife Eleanor and I built our instrument shop together over many years. She taught music. I handled restoration. People trusted us with things that mattered to them. That kind of trust takes a lifetime. Eleanor died 5 years ago from ovarian cancer. She kept teaching longer than she should have. She kept coming into the shop longer than she should have. She kept making lists, even when standing up left her tired. She wanted things in order. She wanted things protected. At the time, I thought that was just her nature. Later, I understood she was planning farther ahead than I was. 3 days before she died, she asked me to sit beside her. She placed an antique watch in my hand. It had belonged to her family. The metal was worn smooth at the edge. The hinge was stiff. She closed my fingers around it and said, "There's something inside. You'll need it one day." I asked, "Inside the case?" She shook her head. "Inside. Later, when it matters." I wanted to ask more, but she was tired. I kept the watch after she died. I put it away in a bedroom drawer. For a long time, I could not make myself open it. Every time I touched it, I heard her voice again. Every time I put it back. I should have understood that sooner. Before Eleanor passed, she created a trust worth $1.4 million for our son, Michael. She was precise about one condition. I would manage it until Michael was truly mature. Those were her words. Not old enough, not married, not settled, mature. Eleanor chose language carefully. I believed that condition would protect him. I did not yet know it would also expose him. After the funeral, Michael and Ashley went back to their own life. They bought a large house in the suburbs. I stayed in Cleveland and kept the shop running. Work helped. A damaged instrument gives you a problem you can solve with your hands. Grief does not. For more than a year, our visits were polite and distant. Then the questions changed. Ashley asked, "Have you ever had the building appraised?" Michael asked what I planned to do with the business if I slowed down. Ashley asked whether I still owned the building outright. Michael asked if I had updated my will. Each question sounded reasonable by itself. That was the danger. Together, they formed a pattern. One Sunday afternoon, Michael stood near my repair counter and asked, "Dad, what exactly did Mom set aside for me?" I said, "You mean the trust?" He nodded. Ashley stayed near the front window, pretending to check her phone. "It's 1.4 million, I told him. Michael looked up. Ashley turned around. Then I added, "And it remains under the conditions your mother wrote." Ashley said too quickly, "What conditions?" "I manage it until Michael is mature enough to receive it." Michael's face tightened. "So I'm still waiting for my father to tell me I'm grown." "That's not what I said." Ashley stepped in with that soft voice she used when she wanted control. "William, surely Eleanor didn't mean for this to become some kind of punishment." "It isn't punishment," I said. "Then what is it?" "Protection." The room went quiet. "You tell me, was I supposed to miss the way she said that word like it offended her?" That conversation changed everything. After they left, I stood in the shop and realized I could no longer treat these visits as harmless. That night, I started writing things down. Dates, questions, tone, timing, who said what, when Ashley brought up property, when Michael avoided my eyes. Years in restoration had trained me to respect patterns. A crack in wood never appears all at once. First there is pressure, then a line, then separation. Families are not so different. A few weeks later they arrived with pastries I had not asked for. Ashley smiled and said, "We were thinking maybe you should simplify." "Simplify what?" I asked. "The building, the shop, your responsibilities." Michael added, "No one's saying right now." Ashley looked around the workshop. "This place could be incredible if someone modernized it." "It's a workshop," I said. "It's also real estate." There it was again. Not music, not family history. Real estate. Michael tried to soften it. She just means the area is changing. And you've both been studying that change very closely, I said. Ashley crossed her arms. You're reading too much into innocent questions. Maybe I was wrong, but it didn't feel right. The longer it went on, the clearer it became that every visit had the same hidden center: money, property, control. Ashley guided the conversations. Michael followed her lead. She introduced an idea. He repeated it later as if it were his own. She pushed. He smoothed. She provoked. He told me not to take it personally. That was how erosion works, not with one blow. With repetition. Then came the party. Ashley called it a casual gathering at their house. She said some friends from work would be there. I almost declined, but Michael asked too, and I still wanted to believe there was room to recover something in our family. Their suburban house was larger than anything Eleanor and I had ever wanted. Bright kitchen, open rooms, expensive finishes, a house designed to impress people. Ashley met me at the door and said, "William, there's someone you should meet." She introduced me to Ryan Cole. "Ryan works in real estate," she said. "He knows downtown development better than anyone." Ryan shook my hand and said, "I've heard a lot about your building." I asked, "From whom?" Ashley answered before he could. "I may have mentioned the shop, only because it's in such a promising area." Later, Ryan found me again and said, "Properties like yours don't stay overlooked forever. Properties. Not shop, not business, not the place Eleanor and I built. Properties." I saw Ashley and Ryan talking near the patio doors more than once that night, too familiar for coworkers, too alert when Michael came near them. No scene, no open display. Just the kind of closeness careful people think no one notices. Ryan said, "If you ever want to discuss options, I'd be glad to walk you through what redevelopment could mean." "For me?" I asked. He held the smile. "For everyone involved." That was the moment I stopped asking whether something was wrong. That still wasn't the worst part. When I got home, I opened the bedroom drawer and took out Eleanor's watch. I held it in my hand for a long time. I still could not open it, but I did not put it away either. I set it on the table beside my notebook. At the end of that week, I made one decision. I hired a private investigator named Carlos Rivera. If I was going to lose something, I wanted the truth in my hands first. Carlos Rivera did not waste words. He came to the shop and said, "Start from the beginning." So I did. I told him about the trust, the questions, the house, the party, Ryan Cole, Ashley's interest in the building, Michael's silence. I showed him the notebook where I had recorded dates and remarks. He read a few pages, nodded, and said, "You did the right thing by writing this down." I asked, "Am I overreacting?" Carlos closed the notebook and said, "I think people usually call obvious behavior innocent because they don't want the answer." Enough for me. He asked for names, work details, and every recent interaction I could remember. Before he left, he said, "Don't confront them. Not yet." "I wasn't planning to," I said. "Good," he replied. The minute people think you're watching, they stop making mistakes in front of you. That was the first week. The second week, Michael called more often than usual. "Dad, you okay?" he asked. "I'm fine. You sound distant." "I've been working." Then came the real question. "Ashley said you seemed upset at the party. Did something happen?" "No," I said. "Nothing happened." That was true in one sense. In another, everything had started happening. Would you have trusted him after that? Ashley started visiting alone sometimes. That was new. She would bring coffee, stand in the shop doorway, and speak as though she was doing me a kindness. "You need to think long-term," she said one morning. "I already do. You need to think realistically." "Meaning?" "Meaning downtown property is valuable. Meaning you don't have to carry all this forever." She glanced toward the back room. Her eyes never lingered on instruments the way Eleanor's had. Ashley looked at spaces the way buyers do. I said, "You seem very invested in my future." She smiled. "I care about this family." Then she added, "And about making sure good assets aren't wasted." Assets. There was that language again. Carlos checked public business records first, then property interests, then professional connections. He kept me informed, but only in pieces. Every few days he called and asked one or two precise questions. Did Ashley ever mention development by name? Yes. Did Michael ever discuss selling directly? No, not directly. Did either of them ask about capacity, health, memory, medication? That question made me pause. I said, "Not medication." But Ashley has said more than once that I seem tired. Carlos was silent for a second. Then he said, "Note every comment like that from now on." I wrote it down. By then, I had begun noticing something else. Michael was no longer coming to the shop to talk about me. He was coming to assess me. One afternoon, he watched me fit a bridge on a violin and said, "You still doing all this alone?" "Yes. That's a lot at your age." I kept working. "It's manageable." He leaned against the bench. "You ever think maybe you don't have to prove anything?" I looked up. "Who said I was proving something?" He shrugged. "I'm just saying, people slow down. That depends on the person." He gave me a tight smile. "You don't have to get defensive. There are sentences people use when they have already moved you into a smaller position in their mind. That was one of them." Another week passed. Then Carlos called and asked if I could meet him after closing. He sat across from me and placed a thin folder down between us. He said, "Ashley Carter and Ryan Cole formed a real estate company together." I did not speak for a moment. Carlos continued, "The paperwork is clean. The timing is not. The company was set up after those visits to you began increasing." "For what purpose?" I asked. He looked at me steadily. "Based on what I've found, your building is part of the target." I felt something settle in me then. Not shock. Something colder. Confirmation. Carlos slid a copy of the filing toward me. I read the names twice. I said, "Michael knows? I can't prove that yet." That yet mattered. Carlos then told me what he had seen personally. Ashley and Ryan meeting outside work, private dinners, overnight stays, an affair. It was Michael I thought about then. Whether he knew, whether he suspected, whether he had been useful to her or simply blind. That question was becoming harder to answer. Carlos said, "There's more." I put both hands flat on the table before he spoke again. He told me Ashley had begun preparing documents to ask a court to declare me incompetent. Not old, not stubborn, incompetent. The papers were not filed yet, but the process had started. Notes, draft materials, language about protecting my interests, securing decision-making authority, transfer of control. For a moment I heard nothing but the hum of the overhead light. Then I asked, "Control of what?" Carlos gave me the answer I already knew. "Your assets, your building, your estate decisions." That was when everything turned. I went home that night and sat at my kitchen table for a long time. Eleanor's watch was still there where I had left it days before. I put my hand over it, not opening it, just feeling the metal under my palm. If Ashley took legal control of my affairs, the trust would not be far behind. The building would not be far behind. The will would not be far behind. And if Michael was involved, then this was no misunderstanding. It was a quiet seizure dressed up as family concern. The next morning, Michael called. "Dad, Ashley thinks we should all sit down soon," he said. "About what?" "Planning. Just making sure things are organized." I asked, "Whose idea is that?" He hesitated. "Both of ours." "I'm not interested," I said. He exhaled sharply. "Why are you making everything difficult?" That sentence stayed with me. Later that week, Ashley came by again. She stood near the front desk and said, "Michael worries about you." "I manage." She tilted her head. "Managing isn't the same as thriving." "Is that what this is now? A wellness visit?" Her smile thinned. "You don't have to be hostile. And you don't have to inspect me." She looked at the shop window, then back at me. "At some point, this family will need clear decisions." I said, "This family already has them." "What does that mean?" "It means Eleanor made herself clear." Ashley's expression changed for a split second. Eleanor unsettled her. Part of me wanted to push harder. I did not. That still wasn't the worst part. Instead, I called David Harper. David was my attorney. Quiet, careful. He listened all the way through before speaking. When I laid out the situation, he did not dramatize it. He asked, "What evidence do you have now?" "Notes from me. Documentation from a private investigator. Enough to know there's danger. Then we prepare before they move first." That was exactly what I needed to hear. David and I met privately. I gave him copies of Carlos's findings. We discussed the trust, the shop, the building, and my will. David told me to assume that anything left exposed could become a target. "If someone intends to question your capacity," he said, "clarity and documentation become your best defense." So I gave him both. We updated my will quietly. We organized records. We secured what needed securing. At the same time, I started hiding copies of evidence inside instruments in the workshop, inside cases, underlining. in places only a restorer would think to use. If one set disappeared, another would remain. One evening, while placing a sealed copy beneath the lining of a case, I caught myself glancing at Eleanor's watch again. She had put that watch in my hand and said I would need what was inside. Maybe I was protecting her voice. Maybe I was avoiding what she had already known. Later that month, Michael came by without Ashley. He stood near the doorway and said, "Can we not do this like enemies?" "Who started doing that?" I asked. He rubbed the back of his neck. "Ashley thinks you've been suspicious lately. She notices that, does she?" "Dad, she's trying to help." "With what?" "With planning, with the future." I looked directly at him. "Whose future?" He stared back for a second, then away. I said, "Michael, is there something you need to tell me?" He answered too fast. "No." That single word told me more than a speech would have. By then, I knew Ashley wanted my property. I knew Michael had let her shape the ground beneath me. The only question left was how much he understood. And I had a feeling the answer was waiting in the one thing Eleanor had told me to open when it mattered. That night, I finally took the watch to my workbench. You tell me, was I supposed to keep waiting after that? I almost damaged the watch trying not to damage it. I set a cloth under it at my workbench and worked slowly with tools delicate enough for old clasps and tiny screws. Eleanor had said there was something inside, deeper than the outer case. She had never wasted words. If she said it mattered, it mattered. It took me longer than it should have, mostly because my hands were steadier than my mind. At last, I found the hidden compartment. Inside were two things, a folded letter, a memory card. For a few seconds, I just looked at them. The room felt very quiet. I knew before opening the letter that Eleanor had not left me sentiment. She had left me protection. The letter was in her handwriting. She wrote that if I was reading it, then the time had come to stop doubting what I was seeing. She wrote that she had concerns about Ashley long before she told anyone. She wrote that appearances had made it difficult to speak plainly at the time, but she did not want me left unprotected later. She asked me not to hesitate if family pressure ever began turning into control. I read that part twice. Then I looked at the memory card. I had to leave the shop for a device that would read it. When I finally played the recording, I heard Eleanor's voice first. Calm, measured. She had recorded a conversation. Ashley was in it. I will not pretend that hearing my late wife's voice after all that time did not nearly stop me where I sat, but I kept listening. Ashley said enough in that recording to remove all doubt. She spoke to a friend. She said she had married Michael knowing his parents had assets. She said she could wait. She said one day everything would pass to him, and then to her. She spoke about patience the way some people speak about strategy. I shut the device off before the recording ended. Then I turned it back on and listened again from the start. That was the moment everything stopped being theory. Eleanor had seen something years earlier. She had hidden proof in that watch. She had trusted me to use it only when the danger became real, and now it had. Maybe you see it differently, but after hearing that, what was I supposed to call Ashley except deliberate? The next morning, I met Carlos and David separately, then together. I gave them copies of the letter and the recording. Carlos listened in silence. David listened twice. Carlos said, "This supports motive." David said, "And timing?" I asked, "Does it help with Michael?" David answered honestly, "Not directly, but it changes the structure of everything around him." That was fair. Michael was still the hardest part for me to judge. Ashley had lied to him, used him, or both, but he had also repeated her talking points, brought her pressure into my house, and stood beside her while she questioned my authority over the trust his mother created. The next 3 years did not pass peacefully. They passed quietly. Carlos kept working. David kept preparing. I kept documenting. We did not rush. Rushing would have warned them. Ashley continued her affair with Ryan. Their company continued moving toward property opportunities downtown. The more records Carlos gathered, the clearer their direction became. My building was not an abstract idea. It was part of a plan they discussed, priced, and circled. Michael and Ashley kept visiting, though not always together. Sometimes Ashley arrived polished and concerned. Sometimes Michael came tense and defensive, as if he had been sent to soften the ground. I stayed calm. I listened. I recorded what mattered. I copied what needed copying. Then I hid duplicate evidence and instruments in my workshop. A cello case held one packet. An old viola body held another. A violin case stored transcripts and notes beneath its lining. Each hiding place was chosen for a reason. No one searches an instrument workshop properly unless they understand instruments. Eleanor's watch had protected the truth once. Now the shop itself was protecting it too. During those 3 years, Ashley never fully dropped the act. She would say, "We only want what's best for you." I would answer, "Then stop deciding what that is." She would smile in that thin way of hers and say, "You always assume the worst." I never raised my voice. Calm makes manipulative people work harder, and when they work harder, they reveal more. Michael became more unsettled as time passed. He snapped sooner. He defended Ashley with less conviction. He began asking narrower questions. One afternoon, he sat in the shop while I adjusted a soundpost and said, "Do you ever plan to retire?" "Not today." "That isn't an answer. It's the one you have." He watched me for a while, then said, "Mom wouldn't have wanted all this tension." I set down the tool and looked at him. "Your mother wanted clarity." He frowned. "Why do you keep saying things like that?" "Because they're true." He held my gaze longer than usual, then asked, "Do you trust Ashley?" There it was. Not a defense, a test. I answered carefully, "Do you?" He did not reply. Another time, Ashley came into the workshop with papers in her hand. Market information, sales, development notes, numbers. She placed them on my bench and said, "You should at least look." I did not touch them. She said, "Downtown is changing fast." "So I hear. You could sell on your terms now." "My terms do not include selling." She leaned closer. "That building is worth more than sentiment." I said, "To you maybe." Her face hardened. "You think I'm your enemy no matter what I say." I answered, "That depends on what you do." For a moment, her mask slipped. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." That line again, as if surrender were the reasonable choice. At times, I asked myself whether I should confront Michael privately with the evidence. More than once, I stood with Eleanor's letter in my hand and considered it, but every path led to the same risk. If he warned Ashley, she and Ryan would shift, hide, erase, or move against me faster. Truth does not help if it is shown before it can hold. So I waited. Carlos uncovered more conversations between Ashley and Ryan about my building. Enough to show intent, enough to show coordination. They were planning around my age, my property, and their assumption that pressure would eventually work. That still was not the worst part. The worst part was how normal they expected me to remain while they did it. Family dinners, holiday calls, questions about my health, remarks about how much work I should avoid, suggestions that someone should help with the books, suggestions that someone should review paperwork. Everything dressed as care. Everything pointed somewhere else. There were nights when I sat alone in the shop after closing and replayed Eleanor's recording. Not often. Just enough to remind myself that instinct without proof is lonely, but instinct with proof becomes duty. David kept urging patience. "Preparation wins cases before they exist," he said. Carlos kept urging discipline. "People like this expose themselves through habit," he said. They were both right. By the 3rd year, the structure was complete. We had the trust records, my notes, business filings connecting Ashley and Ryan, evidence of their affair, evidence of their interest in the building, evidence of planned incompetency filings, Eleanor's hidden letter, Eleanor's hidden recording, recent conversations between Ashley and Ryan about taking control of assets. That was when I decided waiting had done all it could do. I would not die under suspicion in my own family. I would not be studied, assessed, and quietly stripped down while being told it was for my good. I chose a family dinner. Not because I wanted drama, because I wanted witnesses to words, and no room for confusion about what was said. I told Michael and Ashley we needed to discuss inheritance and long-term planning. Ashley agreed immediately, too quickly. Michael sounded uneasy, but he came. The afternoon before that dinner, I walked through the workshop and checked the hidden copies one last time. The cello case, the viola body, the violin case. Then I took Eleanor's watch from the drawer where I had finally begun keeping it again. I set it in my pocket, not as evidence for the police, as a reminder. At some point, every father learns whether the family he protected still understands what protection means. I was about to learn it in one evening. Would you have stayed quiet after seeing all that? Ashley arrived first. That told me something before a single word was spoken. She walked into my house carrying dessert, smiling as if the evening already belonged to her. Michael followed a few minutes later. He looked tired, not angry, not calm, worn down. Ashley set the dessert on the counter and said, "I'm glad we're finally doing this." "Doing what?" I asked. Having an honest conversation. I said yes, honest. We sat at the same oak table where Eleanor and I had spent so many evenings planning small things that became a life. I had placed plates, glasses, and napkins where they belonged. Order matters when people are preparing to lie. Dinner began quietly. Michael asked about work. I answered. Ashley asked whether business had been steady. I said yes. Then she leaned back and folded her hands. So, she said, what did you want to discuss about inheritance? There was no point circling it. I said, before we discuss inheritance, I want to discuss motive. Michael looked up sharply. Ashley did not move. She said, I'm sorry. I opened a folder beside my plate and set several pages on the table. Michael stared at them. Ashley looked down once and then back at me. That controlled. That fast. She knew enough to understand that panic too early would cost her. What is this? Michael asked. A record, I said, of the questions you both started asking after your visits changed. The building, the will, ownership, the trust. Ashley gave a small laugh. You kept notes on family conversations? Yes. That's not normal. No, I said. What led to it wasn't normal. Michael shifted in his seat. Dad, what is this supposed to prove? Not everything, I said. Just the beginning. I handed him the business filing that connected Ashley and Ryan Cole. Michael read the first page, then the second. His face drained slowly. Ashley said, that's a business matter. Michael turned to her. You and Ryan own a company together? She answered without looking at him. It was an opportunity. You never told me. It was not relevant to you. That sentence hung in the room like a bad smell. I said it became relevant when my building entered your discussions. Michael looked at me. What discussions? I slid another transcript toward him. Recent conversations between Ashley and Ryan about property, timing, and control. Not every line was dramatic. That was why it was devastating. Ashley said, you had us recorded? I answered, I had the truth preserved. Her voice hardened. This is insane. Michael was still reading. His hands had started shaking. I said no. What came before this was insane. Then I placed Eleanor's watch on the table. Neither of them understood what it was at first. Michael only frowned. Ashley looked at it, then at me. I said, 3 days before your mother died, she gave me this. She told me there was something inside. She said I would need it one day. Michael whispered, Mom? I opened the watch case, removed the memory card, and placed the audio device on the table. Ashley stood up halfway. What is this? Sit down, I said. She looked at Michael. We are not doing this. I repeated myself once. Sit down. Michael looked at her and said, sit. She sat. Then I played Eleanor's recording. I will not forget Michael's face for the rest of my life. First confusion, then recognition of Ashley's voice, then disbelief, then the slow collapse of a man hearing the shape of his own marriage from outside it. Ashley was in that recording speaking to a friend, saying she had married Michael knowing what his parents had, saying she could wait, saying one day it would all come through him. Ashley spoke over the audio. This is old. This means nothing. People say things. I stopped the recording and looked at her. Would you like me to continue? She did not answer. Michael said very quietly, Is that you? Ashley turned toward him. You don't know the context. He asked again, louder this time, Is that you? She stood up. William set this up to turn you against me. I said, sit down. She snapped back. You've been trying to control everyone for years. There it was, at last. No concern, no softness, no family language, just accusation. Michael looked at the business filing again, then the transcript, then the device. Ryan, he said. Is Ryan why you kept talking about the building? Ashley answered, Ryan understands the market. Michael stared at her. Are you sleeping with him? She said nothing. That silence did what shouting could not. I played one more recent recording. Ashley and Ryan discussing plans to gain control of assets, timing, pressure, how things would be easier once legal authority changed. Michael pushed his chair back so hard it struck the floor behind him. You lied to me, he said. Ashley turned on him immediately. Don't do this. Not in front of him. In front of him? Michael said. This is about him. No, she shot back. This is about him trying to poison you against your wife. I said, the wife who formed a real estate company with the man she was sleeping with while preparing to take control of my property. Michael put both hands on the table. You tried to have him declared incompetent? Ashley looked at me. Not Michael. Me. You were never going to manage this family well forever, she said. That was the coldest sentence of the night. Michael took a step back from her. You tried to do what? Ashley said. I was trying to protect our future. Our future? He said. By stealing from my father? You call it stealing, I call it planning. He stared at her as if he had never seen her face before. I opened one last folder and laid out the rest. My notes. Carlos's findings. The proposed incompetency documents. Dates. The affair. The company. The property discussions. Eleanor's letter. It was all there. Ashley looked from page to page and finally understood what she had not understood before. This was not a family argument. This was finished. She said, What exactly do you think happens next? I answered, The next part is not up to you. At that moment there was a knock at the door. Ashley froze. I had already invited the police to come and receive the evidence. No scene in the driveway. Just timing. Order. Transfer. Ashley whispered, You called the police? Yes. For what? For what you planned. She stood so quickly her chair scraped across the floor. This is a mistake. I said no. The mistake was believing I would stay quiet to keep the peace. 2 officers entered after I opened the door. I identified myself, explained that evidence had been prepared, and directed them to the documentation on the table. Ashley began speaking fast then. She called it harassment. She called it manipulation. She called it grief twisted into paranoia. She called it everything, except false. Michael did not defend her. One officer asked Ashley for basic information. The other began organizing the materials for collection. I handed over copies, not originals. David had made sure of that. Carlos had helped structure it. Michael sank back into his chair and covered his face with one hand. Ashley looked at him and said, Say something. He lowered his hand and answered, I don't know who you are. Those 7 words did more damage than shouting could have done. The officers finished their initial intake. Ashley was informed that an investigation would follow regarding conspiracy to commit fraud and elder exploitation. She kept insisting there was context. She kept insisting this was unfinished. In my mind, it had ended the moment Eleanor's voice filled that room. When Ashley finally left with the officers, she turned once at the doorway and said, You'll regret this. I answered no. I regret waiting this long. Then she was gone. The house became very quiet. Michael stayed standing in the dining room for a long moment, looking at the table, the folders, the watch, the empty doorway. He looked older than when he had arrived. He said, Dad? I held up a hand. Not forever, just then. There is nothing you can say tonight that changes what you stood beside, I told him. He nodded once. He understood that much. And still, that was not the end. Maybe you see it differently, but what else was I supposed to do that night? After Ashley left, Michael sat down again without being asked. He looked at the table as though it might rearrange itself into a different truth if he stared long enough. It did not. Evidence never becomes gentler by waiting. The watch was still beside my plate. Eleanor's watch. The one she placed in my hand because she already understood what I did not. Michael said, How long have you known? I answered, Long enough. He swallowed hard. Why didn't you tell me? Because I didn't know what you would do with it. He closed his eyes for a moment. Then he asked, Did you think I was part of it? I gave him the only honest answer. I thought you were standing close enough to it that the difference stopped mattering. That hurt him. It was supposed to. He said, I didn't know about Ryan. You knew enough to question me for her. He looked down again. You knew enough to let her talk about my property as if it were already moving, I said. He did not deny that either. At the start of all this, there is never a clean line between the guilty and the innocent. Michael had been deceived by his wife. He had also failed his father. Both were true. I still wonder what you would have done. We sat in silence for a while. Finally, he said, I thought she was trying to help us prepare. I asked, Prepare for what? He answered in a thin voice, For the future, for responsibility, for not being caught off guard. I nodded once. And when she asked about the trust, he looked ashamed. She said Mom had probably meant it as security, not as a test. It was both, I said. He rubbed his face with both hands. I kept thinking if I could just get you to talk more openly, things would settle down. Settle down for whom? He had no answer left. The next weeks moved quickly outside the house and slowly inside it. Ashley came under investigation for conspiracy to commit fraud and elder exploitation. I cooperated. David coordinated what needed coordinating. Carlos provided what he had gathered. Ryan Cole disappeared as soon as pressure reached him. He withdrew money from the account he shared with Ashley and vanished from the picture. Michael filed for divorce. He did not ask my permission. He simply did it. By then, he had learned that some decisions are late before they are made. A marriage built on deceit does not become solid because the truth arrives too late. He came to the shop a few days after filing. Not the house. The shop. That mattered too. He stood in the doorway and waited until I looked up from the bench. "Can I come in?" he asked. "You're already in," I said. He took a few steps and stopped. The workshop was quiet except for the small sounds I trusted more than conversation. The hum of the lamp, a cloth moving over varnish, the faint settling noise of wood in dry air. Michael said, "I'm not here to ask for money." I set my tool down and faced him fully. "That's a good start." He nodded. "I know." He looked around at the instruments, the shelves, the cabinets, the bench where I had worked for years. Then he said, "I don't think I ever understood what this place actually was to you. To Mom either." I let the silence sit there before answering. "No, you didn't." That could have ended the conversation. It did not. He said, "I want to learn." Those 4 words would have meant very little from most men. From him, on that day, they meant something because they did not come with a second sentence. No mention of inheritance, no mention of the trust, no mention of what he deserved, just that. I asked, "Learn what?" "The work," he said. "How to restore. How to do what you and Mom built." I studied him carefully. He looked thinner, less certain, but also less defended. I said, "This isn't penance." "I know." "It isn't quick." "I know." "It doesn't erase anything." He nodded. "I know that too. Maybe you would have sent him away. Maybe some fathers should." But I kept hearing Eleanor's word. Mature. Not perfect. Not forgiven. Mature. The trust had never been about age alone. It had been about whether Michael could become a man who understood the weight of what he received. So I said, "Then start by sweeping the floor." He almost smiled at that, but not quite. He found the broom and started. That first day we said very little. I showed him where cases were stored, how humidity changes wood, why impatience ruins more than neglect sometimes does. He listened without arguing. That was new. When he made mistakes, I corrected him. When he asked good questions, I answered them. There was no ceremony to it, no sudden healing, just work. The trust remained exactly where it had always been. Locked, protected, unmoved. Michael asked about it once, several weeks later, while we were closing the shop. "Does any of this change the trust?" he said. I put a cloth over a finished instrument and answered, "Not yet." He accepted that. That mattered more than the question itself. As months passed, he kept returning, on time, quiet, ready to do small tasks before large ones. He learned how to clean without harming finish, how to inspect seams, how to tell the difference between a repair that needs force and one that needs patience. Sometimes he would stop at Eleanor's old piano and stand there for a second before going back to work. One afternoon, while fitting pegs under my instruction, he said, "Did Mom know all along?" I looked at the violin in my hands before answering. "Not all along. Enough." He nodded slowly. "She protected us." "She tried," I said. He was quiet for a while. Then he asked, "Including me?" I gave him the truth again. "Especially you." That seemed to break something open in him. He just set the peg down and looked away until he could speak normally again. The police investigation continued outside our daily routines. I cooperated when asked. David handled the legal structure. I did not build my life around watching Ashley fall. That was never the point. The point was that she no longer had a hand inside my home, my records, my property, or my decisions. The point was that silence had ended. From time to time, Michael tried to apologize directly. He would say, "I should have seen it." I would answer, "You should have." He would say, "I was stupid." I would tell him, "You were willing." That distinction mattered. Stupidity can be accidental. Willingness is a choice. Still, I also saw change. Not dramatic change. Real change. The kind that appears through repetition. He stopped asking where things would go after I died. He started asking how things were done while I lived. He stopped speaking in Ashley's language. He started listening before filling silence. He stopped treating the shop like property and began treating it like work. That was not forgiveness. It was evidence. One evening after we closed up, I took Eleanor's watch from my pocket and set it on the bench between us. Michael looked at it and said, "That's the one from the recording." "Yes." He touched the table but not the watch. You keep carrying it. Yes. He asked. Why? I thought about that before answering. Because your mother knew the difference, I said, between peace and quiet. He did not reply, but he understood. By then, the shape of the future had changed. Not become perfect, just honest. Michael was back in the workshop, learning the trade his parents had built. The trust remained intact, still under the condition Eleanor set. He could receive it one day, but only if he proved he was worthy of it. Not through words. Through character, through discipline, through years, if needed. People sometimes think justice has to look loud. In my life it did not. Justice looked like documents in order, a lie exposed before it took legal form, a son forced to see what he had allowed. A workshop still standing, a watch opened at the right time, and a house that was mine when the silence settled again. I do not know whether Michael will ever receive that $1.4 million. I know only this. If he does, it will not be because he expected it, demanded it, or stood beside someone who tried to take it. It will be because he became the kind of man his mother meant when she wrote that word. Mature. Until then, I work. He learns. The shop stays in my hands, and this time so does the truth.